Get ready for a deep dive into a perspective on education that you might not have heard before, one that might even challenge some of your assumptions about learning.
Sounds intriguing already. What's on the docket for today?
We're going to be exploring the Hindu view of education.
Okay. And where are we getting this view from?
Well, our main source is a speech from 1971. It's called The Hindu View of Education, and it was given by a man named Ram Swarup. I have to say, even just dipping my toes into this has got me thinking.
Oh, what's caught your attention?
Well, Swarup starts off with this idea that might sound a bit radical to some of us in the West. He says that at our core, we're spirits.
Spirits. That's a pretty different starting point than saying we're just brains in a body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it has big implications for how you approach education. It's not just about developing the physical body or even the intellect. It's about seeing those things through the lens of this greater life force.
So it's not about ignoring the physical or mental, but seeing them as part of something bigger.
Right. And that's where this idea of yoga comes in. And I don't just mean the physical poses.
I was just thinking that. There's got to be more to it than downward dog.
Yeah. Swarup's talking about yoga as a whole system for exploring our inner world, for connecting with that deeper self.
Are you saying ancient Hindu education involved teaching kids to meditate?
You got it. And it wasn't just about achieving some kind of blissful state, although that was part of it. The idea was that by cultivating this inner awareness, you actually become more effective in the outer world.
So it's not about retreating from the world, but empowering you to engage with it in a more meaningful way.
Exactly. And I think that's something we could really use in modern education. Think about all the stress and anxiety kids face these days.
Yeah, for sure.
What if we were teaching them from a young age to cultivate inner stillness, to build that resilience?
That could be pretty powerful. But how did they actually do that? Did Swarp get into specifics?
He does. He talks about japa, which is the repetition of mantras, and meditation as key tools for developing this inner peace.
So practices that have been around for centuries.
And some people might find those terms a bit mystical, but they really do have a lot in common with modern mindfulness techniques, which are gaining traction these days.
It's true. We are seeing more and more research about how mindfulness can benefit students, helping them focus, manage stress, even boost their emotional intelligence.
It's like we're rediscovering these ancient practices and realizing they have a place in today's world.
Totally.
But it's not all about the inner world in this Hindu view of education. Swarup also talks about the importance of developing a strong, healthy body and a sharp, focused mind.
Well, that makes sense, right? You need that foundation to support everything else. How do they go about achieving that?
It seems like they took a holistic approach to physical development. Swarup doesn't give us a ton of details, but he does say, "May I see and hear clearly and abundantly."
I love that. It really speaks to being present in the world, taking it all in with your senses.
It's quite a contrast to our modern world, where we're constantly bombarded with screens and information overload.
For sure. So what about mental development?
Swarup is very clear that it's not just about cramming facts into your head. He says Hindu education isn't just about acquiring information, it's about shaping the mind itself, the very instrument we use to process all that information.
It's about developing those critical thinking skills, that ability to analyze and understand.
Exactly. Makes you wonder if our modern education system sometimes misses the mark on that. We're so focused on standardized tests and memorization.
Yeah. Do we spend enough time teaching kids how to think for themselves?
That's a big question.
Hmm.
And we're going to need to take a deeper dive into that another time. For now, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about another key theme that Swarup brings up. He contrasts this Hindu vision of interconnectedness and harmony with oneself, with others, with nature, with what he sees as a modern emphasis on competition and exploitation.
It does seem like our world is often set up as a zero-sum game, like someone always has to lose for someone else to win.
And I think that leads to some pretty important questions about how our education system might be shaping those mindsets. But we're going to have to leave that for another day.
I'm already looking forward to it. This is definitely making me think about education in a whole new way.
Me too.
Mm.
And there's so much more to explore in this Hindu view of education. But for now, we'll take a pause here. Be sure to join us for the next part of our deep dive, where we'll unpack even more of Swarup's insights.
Can't wait.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We were just starting to get into how this Hindu view of education values interconnectedness and harmony. But there's another piece of this puzzle I want to explore, something that feels super relevant today.
Oh, you're talking about that strong teacher-student bond, right? The one Swarp talks about.
You got it. He makes it clear that this relationship was absolutely essential in traditional Hindu education. It wasn't just about teachers standing up there and lecturing.
More like a partnership.
Yeah. It was about a genuine connection built on respect, trust, and that shared pursuit of truth.
I noticed Swarup uses this word reverence, talking about the attitude towards knowledge in this system.
Reverence. Interesting word choice. What do you make of that?
Well, it makes me think of knowledge as something sacred, something you approach with humility and a sense of awe, not just something you download onto your phone.
And that actually makes me think about the decline of reverence that
Yeah.
Swarup sees happening in modern education.
Yeah.
He even links it to things like distractions, disengagement, even the violence we're seeing in schools and universities these days.
Wow. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. Makes you wonder if we've lost something important along the way. Like if we've lost that respect for knowledge, is it any surprise we're facing these problems?
I see your point. So what if we could bring that sense of reverence back, create learning environments where knowledge is truly valued, not just seen as a stepping stone to something else?
Now you're talking. And it's not just about the attitude toward knowledge itself. It's about that teacher-student dynamic too. Swarup quotes from the Upanishads, and it really struck me. It says, "May we study together. May God protect us both. May we never spite each other."
There's a real sense of shared purpose in those words. Like, learning is this collaborative journey
Totally different from that us versus them feeling you sometimes get in schools today.
where teachers are the authority figures and students just got to follow the rules.
Exactly. But Swarup doesn't stop there. He also brings up some other qualities he sees as helpful for learning. Qualities like simplicity, austerity, chastity, and faith.
Those sound a bit old-fashioned, don't they? Like something out of a history book.
They do. But I think they point to a level of focus and dedication that we've kind of lost touch with in our super busy, hyper-connected world.
Yeah, it's hard to go dip on anything when you're constantly bombarded with distractions.
Right. But there's one more key point I want to bring up. Swarup talks about how democratic Hindu education was. Students from all walks of life learned together. He wasn't focused on social status or how much money your family had.
I remember those anecdotes he shares. Princes studying alongside commoners. It's a pretty powerful image.
Makes you think about access to education today. Things feel pretty unequal these days, determined by your zip code, your socioeconomic background.
It raises the question of whether we're living up to the true potential of education, if we're holding people back because of where they came from.
It's something to think about for sure. But before we get too sidetracked, I want to bring it back to Swarup. What else from his speech stood out to you?
You know, that whole thing about mental peace keeps coming back to me, remember? He said achieving that inner stillness was considered a key part of education.
Like it was a core subject alongside math and history.
Yeah. And he even talks about specific practices they use to cultivate that inner peace, like japa, the repetition of mantras, and meditation.
It's like they were onto something back then. Something we're just starting to rediscover now, with all the talk about mindfulness.
It's amazing how these ancient practices are finding their way back into our lives. And it's not just hype. There's real science backing up the benefits of mindfulness for kids and adults. Less stress, more focus, better ability to manage your emotions.
Imagine if our schools embraced that. If mindfulness was woven into the very fabric of education.
It would be a game changer, right? Not just for students, but for teachers, too. I mean, could you imagine if teachers were trained in mindfulness? They could create these calm, focused learning environments.
It's a beautiful vision. But before we get carried away, I think we need to take a breath here. We've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive.
I agree. Let's let these ideas sink in for a moment. Then in the next part, we'll try to tie it all together. Explore how we can apply these ancient principles to the challenges we're facing in education today.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the Hindu view of education. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about inner peace, about reverence for knowledge, about the importance of that teacher-student connection. But I think the big question on everyone's mind is, so what? What does all this ancient wisdom mean for us today?
And you know, Swarup actually tackles that head-on in his speech. He talks about how we need to move beyond just imitating other education systems.
It's not saying we should just throw out everything modern.
No, not at all. He acknowledges that there are valuable things we can learn from other cultures and traditions.
Okay, so we're not reinventing the wheel, but...
But we need to develop our own approaches, he says, ones that are in harmony with our best thoughts.
So taking the best of what we've learned, but making it our own.
Exactly. Creating something that truly resonates with our own unique context. And I think that message is even more important in today's world. I mean, think about it. We're so interconnected now. Ideas are constantly flowing across borders.
And it can be tempting to just copy whatever seems to be working somewhere else.
Right. But SWARP is urging us to resist that temptation.
So instead of just copying, we should be
Looking inward, tapping into our own strengths, our own values, and then using that wisdom to create something truly transformative.
Okay, I'm with you on that. But how do we actually do that? How do we take these ancient principles and make them relevant to education today?
Well, I think it starts with a shift in focus, away from just academic achievement and towards a more holistic view of education.
So less emphasis on grades and test scores.
It's not about ignoring those things altogether, but it's about recognizing that they're only part of the picture. We also need to prioritize things like social emotional learning, character development, maybe even spiritual growth.
It's about nurturing the whole person, not just filling their heads with information.
Right, and that might involve bringing in practices like mindfulness or meditation, creating space for reflection and connection with nature.
Shifting the whole culture of education away from competition and towards cooperation.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think all of this goes back to what Swarup said about seeing the inherent value in every student, regardless of their background, their circumstances.
He talked about how in Hindu education, princes and commoners learn together. No separation.
Exactly. So we need to be asking ourselves, are our education systems truly accessible to everyone? Or are we still holding some students back because of their socioeconomic status, their race, their ethnicity?
We've covered so much in this deep dive. It's a lot to process. But if you had to boil it all down to one key takeaway for our listeners, what would it be?
I think the most important thing is to remember that there are many different ways of thinking about education. We don't have to be limited by the systems we've inherited.
It's about opening our minds to new possibilities.
Exactly.
So, to our listeners, I hope this exploration has sparked some curiosity in you. Maybe it's made you question some of your assumptions about education, or even given you some ideas to try out in your own life.
Maybe you're thinking about how to cultivate more inner stillness, or how to approach learning with more reverence.
Whatever questions this deep dive has raised for you, I encourage you to keep exploring them. The answers might surprise you. And who knows? This ancient wisdom might just hold the key to creating a more fulfilling and meaningful educational experience for everyone.